Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Hello everyone, this is Fortune's Wheel, and I'm your host Jonathan, and today we're continuing our first Patreon series called Poland Finds Its Place. I want to sincerely thank you all who are listening to this as you've generously donated to the production of this podcast and shown that you believe in what's happening here. There are no words for my appreciation, so I'll simply offer another heartfelt thank you. So, back to our first members-only series. This is episode 3, entitled The Many Wars of Boleslaw. I hope you enjoy the show. So let's get this straight. Mieszko I married Dobrava of Bohemia. They had a son named Bolesław I, or as he would come to be known, Bolesław the Brave, who then married a West Slavic princess named Emnilda. But Mieszko and Dobrava also had a daughter named Sviatoslava, who eventually married the Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn and Sviatoslava had a son named Knut, who became King of Denmark and England for a couple decades. In one generation, right, the Polish people went from a scattered mixture of early agriculturalists and subsistence hunters in the plains to the north of the Alps to being a powerful dukedom within a leader, or with a leader being the uncle of one of the most powerful leaders of Europe in the 11th century. This is far from being a rags to riches story. Like, Poland is legit, and Uncle Boleslaw will have his own stories to tell soon. Let's not forget about how impressed, could threatened also be a word used here, by Poland the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III was when he visited Duke Boleslaw around the year 1000. But this idealism was short-lived as Otto died in January of 1002. Cutting short any lasting plans the Duke and his Emperor had with each other. In fact, what drew those plans to an even swifter end was the fact that Henry II took over and, well, he looked upon Poland through a different lens altogether. Bruno of Cufert's words bear leaden weight with that in mind when he wrote around the same time, quote, "Nobody lamented Otto's death with greater grief than Boleslaw," end quote. It's been lost to history what Otto and Boleslaw may or may not have discussed during the emperor's visit. But after the emperor left Poland, before his death, we see some of the possible fruits of these discussions in the forms of Boleslaw minting his own coins and creating the earliest formal Polish currency on record, declaring himself the Prince of Poland, publicly establishing Gniezno as the official capital of the duchy, and passing a series of laws to bring more of the duchy's economy under his control, such as the prohibition of hunting beavers without proper permission, for instance. These were just the first stirrings of Duke Boleslaw I's excellent statesmanship. After quite a bit of controversy, intrigue, murder, and all-around shenanigans in Germany after Otto's death, one man emerged from the ruckus with the German crown in hand. Henry of Bavaria, the Henry stated earlier, who would soon be called Emperor Henry II. Now, given Poland's growing influence and success on the battlefield already, Boleslaw was approached by some of the people seeking the crown, and Boleslaw deftly swerved any hard position on the succession. However, he did take advantage of a sizable piece of German real estate while everyone was engaged in a cartoonish cloud of fists and curse words, if you can imagine it. Boleslaw quickly swooped in and grabbed lands in Lusatia, among others. It was clever, sneaky, and bold. Depending who came out the other end, Boleslaw could either throw his hands up and claim innocence, or he could get on someone's no-fly list. Well, with Henry of Bavaria coming out on top, Duke Boleslaw I found his name on one of those lists. Boleslaw spouted off at the mouth about Henry's demands for captured lands to be returned, twisting some words about Germany not exactly being Otto's Germany during the succession crisis, and pointed a certain finger at King Henry II, saying he's spreading lies and defaming him. This usually doesn't sit well with kings, and while Boleslaw was visiting Merseburg, he survived an attempted murder, an attempted assassination, causing him to completely turn his back on the German crown. In fact, Boleslaw was so pissed off that he invaded, took a town's citizenry, every last one of them, as slaves and prisoners, and torched it. At this point, the old emperor's 22-year-old corpse had only been in the ground for maybe a year. Well, what was left of it after everyone threw it in the wood chipper and scattered its holy pieces across Christendom to become photo ops in the cathedrals across Europe 1,000 years later. 1 year out, and Boleslaw not only invaded Germany twice, but he also torched one of its villages right under the nose of its new king, and then turned his sights on Bohemia to his south. Boleslaw had recently set up a little puppet ruler in Bohemia by the name of Vladivoj, but Vladivoj had died in less than a year there. Boleslaw I went to Bohemia and forcefully put a former leader back in the hot seat, who turned around and massacred quite a few powerful Bohemian noblemen. Well, Boleslaw returned to Bohemia to clean up his own mess by deposing Boleslaw III. Yes, I know, Bolesław I of Poland and Bolesław III of Bohemia. You know how these things go 1,000 years ago in Europe. And then blinding Bolesław III to ensure he'd never be fit for power again. But see, here's where it gets pretty interesting for a spell. Boleslaw didn't put someone else in charge in Prague, the capital of Bohemia. Nope, he just took Bohemia for his own. Well, this was a problem, seems how Bohemia was a direct vassal to the King of Germany, Henry II. King Henry demanded Boleslaw to either step down or give his full loyalty to the German crown once again. Well, I think we know enough about Boleslaw the Brave to know his response. Boleslaw saw alliances with smaller regional leaders, such as that from Schweinfurt. Henry gathered his own forces and allies, including even the Lutici, a West Slavic people, if you remember, who were invaded and harassed by Mieszko decades earlier during Poland's earliest expansions. Between 1003 and 1018, 15 years, this near constant back and forth played out. I don't mean to dismiss it by, fully jumping over it, but it really boiled down to a series of Poland wins, Germany wins, Poland wins, Poland wins, Poland wins, on and on, right? It's worth mentioning that Bolesław's son, Mieszko II, was also involved in the later years, leading armies and even raiding German border towns. On January the 3rd, 1018, about the time that Canute was setting up shop pretty firmly and even marrying the former queen over in England, well, January 30th, 1018, this all finally came to a close. We have to remember what this was all over. Boleslaw, in total, captured lands in Germany, Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia over the course of the last 15 years. And though some lands shifted back and forth, by the end, Henry II realized that this conflict was going absolutely nowhere. Well, that and Boleslaw didn't support Henry for emperor initially, so yeah, bad blood still. This series of wars also punctuated by slow periods and peace treaties, so don't, think it was one long continuous war, as we see it today. One example of peace was an agreement negotiated in Poznan in 1006, but though it created a ceasefire, that's as much peace as would be accepted. Neither man was willing to budge. Henry demanded complete fealty, while Boleslaw demanded a position equal to his previous position with Otto III. With such an impasse, war was back on less than a year later, in 1007, and this period would be long and brutal for both sides. And these times of peace weren't always because they fought to a stalemate or something like that, like in Poznan. No, it was much more nuanced than that. Again, neither man had any intention of bailing on the effort. For instance, King Henry II had dreams of being emperor one day, and in order to be emperor, he needed to show he could broker peace within his own realm. How could Rome accept him as an emperor if he's actively fighting against one of his own vassals? For years. Leading up to his coronation, Henry was leading Boleslaw into a peace treaty, a meticulously calculated, designed peace treaty. In 1013, Henry and Boleslaw negotiated in Merseburg, Germany. Merseburg's treaty was important for a few lasting reasons. Boleslaw kept much of the lands he captured. In exchange, Boleslaw gave his support for Henry's coronation as well as his loyalty in an official capacity. Oh, and Henry gave Boleslaw 500 knights to help shore up some beef with his Kievan neighbors, but that's a story for another time. And finally, Bolesław I's son, Mieszko II, sealed the whole thing by marrying Rycheza of Lotharingia, a niece of the former Emperor Otto III. In truth, this marriage was arranged years earlier, but with the wars occurring, it never happened. Until now. But see, here's the thing about Boleslaw. He had his own plans, too. Though Henry might have felt he had been the designer of the whole ordeal, soon after Boleslaw's plans were revealed, though. It turns out he had already given his support for Gregory VI as Pope, which went directly against Henry II's choice. And he didn't help Henry as the German king marched toward the Italian crown. Friendly reminder that in order to be named Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, you first had to possess the German and Italian crowns. In the end, Boleslaw backed the wrong horse. Again. And Henry had Benedict VIII given the papacy, who then, in turn, elevated Henry II to emperor in February of 1014. During the summer of the following year, 1015, Emperor Henry II persuaded the Lutici to harass Boleslaw's northern lands while he approached from the southeast. Well, Boleslaw made fairly quick work of the Lutici, which ruined Henry's plans to pinch the Polish forces between them. Henry rallied his own forces and the remaining Lutici and eventually made their way to Niemcia, I hope I pronounced that right, where they laid siege to the city. However, between Boleslaw deftly breaking through Henry's surrounding forces on two surprise engagements and refortifying the city, as well as the townspeople building a giant cross and hanging it from the side of the city facing the pagan Lutici, which was a big morale buster, between the two, the siege was called off, and Henry withdrew from Poland completely. The emperor was humiliated. So, he did what emperors do, and he lashed out. He named Boleslaw an enemy of the state, so of course, Boleslaw didn't take too kindly to that, and once again, he invaded Germany. And this is where we find things, finally, mercifully, coming to an ultimate conclusion in what we call the German-Polish Wars of the 11th century.
A massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, especially these days. 8 different settings, adjustable intensity, plus it's heated. and it just feels so good. Yes, a massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, but when it can come with a car, suddenly it seems quite practical. The all-new 2025 Volkswagen Tiguan, packed with premium features like available massaging front seats, it only feels extravagant.
Love espresso, drip coffee, and cold brew? With the Ninja Luxe Cafe, if you can crave it, you can brew it. Espresso? Balanced. Drip coffee? Rich. Cold brew in a flash. With Barista Assist technology, you brew with no stress and no guesswork and make perfect silky microfoam hands-free from dairy or plant-based milks. Shop the Ninja Luxe Cafe at ninjakitchen.com.
In Bautzen, in the year 1018, January 30th, if you remember, a peace deal was finally reached. Now, peace in the Middle Ages, as you probably are well aware by now, is a fickle thing, but this one seemed to stick around for a while. In my opinion, these wars just got old, it seems like. From Bolesław's standpoint, he had no reason to budge. I mean, he was kind of winning on aggregate, so why back down? Besides, his eastern neighbors, the Kievan Rus, were currently living through a period of expansion, and for those who remember some earlier episodes of the podcast, they were about to be introduced to a golden age of sorts of their own. Confidence was on the up and up, to say the very least about it, and this was a problem for Boleslaw, especially since he was now intertwined with the Rus by marriage. Yeah, he had married his daughter to Svatopolk, son of Vladimir the Great, and brother to its future Grand Prince, Yaroslav the Wise. Well, Vladimir was dead, and Svatopolk was beefing with his brothers and needed Bolesław's help. It was certainly within Bolesław's interest to have a strong eastern ally in the Rus, so Boleslaw had to juggle that over the last few years too. Svatopolk was in charge, which was good, but there was still one brother out there who posed a threat, and Henry had enough problems on his own. Being emperor, as well as wearing 2 more crowns as King of Germany and King of Italy, he had his own issues, and Poland was an issue he simply wasn't gaining any ground with, so it might be best to move on and shore up his responsibilities and support elsewhere. To be frank, Henry needed a big win after being humiliated by the Polish for a decade and a half. Henry turned his sights on the problems in Lotharingia to his west, and the growing issue of some little group of northern Frenchmen known as Normans, who were beginning to flood into southern Italy and disrupting the already tenuous politics and society of the area. Southern Italy, to Henry, wasn't a huge deal, but it was a big deal to the Pope in Rome, and seems how he was emperor, it was his responsibility to also see to the security of Rome. Mix that into the fact that Hungary was coming to grips with its newfound Christianity and needed help implementing it and, keeping the nobility, as well as the Eastern Roman Empire getting bolder during its own age of prosperity under Emperor Basil II, called the Bulgar Slayer. Well, Henry had more pressing matters to figure out than, Poland, who wasn't even a state 50 years earlier. So at Bautzen in 1018, a peace was in the works, but it's very telling how Henry saw the whole ordeal after 15 years. Henry wasn't even there to negotiate. Literally there. He was not present in the city of Bautzen. He sent diplomats to speak for him and reach a conclusion, and even sign off on it all. Boleslaw was there, so the affront no doubt stung, but at the end of the day, this wasn't the first time Henry had publicly disrespected Boleslaw, and Boleslaw could sit back and rest a bit knowing that he'd put the emperor in his place time and again for such things. He didn't need to prove anything at this point. And the negotiations proved it too. Boleslaw kept his lands in Lusatia, married his daughter into the German nobility, and went home to Poland a happy man. Oh, Boleslaw was also a few hundred German knights richer, which would be used in the fight for Svatopolk's rule in Kiev. At this point, Boleslaw had capitalized on his grandfather's, and especially his father's, successes, and grew Poland to one of its largest territorial states in its millennium-long history. It encompassed almost all of modern-day Poland, the exception being some of the northernmost lands still under the control of West Slavic communities like the Lutici, for instance, as well as lands in modern-day Belarus, Ukraine, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Germany, and even that little swath of Russian land surrounded by Poland and Lithuania along the Baltic Sea that no one outside of Central or Eastern Europe knows why that's even Russian. Yeah, he had that too. To be sure, some of these lands wouldn't stay in Bolesław's hands long, but it's worth noting, if only to see how active Boleslaw was during the first 2/3 of his reign. Now that whole German thing was figured out and the emperor no longer had an eye on him. Boleslaw took those few hundred knights and a large contingency of Poles and rode east toward Kiev in the year 1019. Again, this wasn't the first time he did this either. We're picking this part of the story up after a handful of years of this already. Yes, while Boleslaw was taking on the Holy Roman Empire, he was also juggling the problems his son-in-law, the Kievan Prince Światopolk, during the succession crisis over there too. He had his hands full, to say the least. So to review, 1003 to 1018, Poland humiliates Germany. 1013 to 1018, right there in the middle, Poland humiliates Germany while also fighting the Rus. And again, here we are in 1019, and Germany is done being humiliated by Boleslaw, so Boleslaw turns his entire attention to putting his son-in-law on the Kievan throne. Just for fun on this podcast, we'll call this next chapter of Boleslaw's life the Kievan Expedition of 1019. So Tietmar of Merseburg had Boleslaw's numbers like this: a few thousand Polish soldiers, 1,000 Pechenegs, 500 Hungarians, and those knights given to him in the treaty earlier that year. By late July, Boleslaw was on the move and arrived near Wolin along the Bug River in eastern Poland, border territory with Kiev. So to briefly set the context here, although we went into much greater detail earlier on the podcast, back on, I believe it was episode 30, kind of pulled that out of my head, so I hope I'm right on that. So just to briefly set some context here, Grand Prince Vladimir the Great died in 1015. He split up his vast Rus territory between his 4 sons. Światopolk and Yaroslav were the 2 remaining, after Światopolk killed the other 2, Boris and Gleb. Many Rus believed he was cursed and called him Światopolk the Damned for such crimes, so Boleslaw was backing a cursed man in the eyes of the very people who were to be ruled by that cursed man. Anyway, it came down to the aggressive Światopolk and the mysterious up to this point in history, Yaroslav. As is so often the case, armies lined up on either side of in this case, the Bug River, staring at each other and probably shouting curses and screaming and, banging their weapons together in a bid for intimidation. I'm thinking the Battle of Malden right now. But see, this battle wasn't planned and probably shouldn't have occurred at all, as it almost always is the case, had one side not goaded the other unnecessarily into engaging. Boleslaw had quickly dragged his forces eastward and was set to throw a rager in order to boost his men's morale before the big fighting began. It was a calculated decision, as he knew that he would engage Yaroslav very soon. Scouts had certainly sent word to both leaders that the other was nearby, but no one made much in the way of immediate preparations. So, feast! Rager it is. Blow off a little steam, get on your men's good sides, and party until you wake up at noon the next day, right? Well, that was the plan, at least. See, while the servants were cleaning the carcasses of the deer and the pigs and the cattle and the chickens and whatever else was on the menu, Yaroslav's archers were ordered to head to the river where this was taking place and, taking a little target practice. Not many were actually killed, and the result was really just in pissing the servants off enough that they took their knives and hammers and whatever else they had for the task at hand, and they crossed the river and laid an epic smackdown on these archers. Most of the archers were able to withdraw safely and report back to Yaroslav what had happened, but seems how they were just outside Bolesław's camp. Who do we think heard of the news first? That's right, Boleslaw. So Boleslaw quickly ordered his army, sans the Pecheneg horsemen, to cross the Bug and engage the unsuspecting Rus. Oh, and servants, they just kept cleaning the meat. They went right back to work. They'll be back in time for the feast as far as Boleslaw was concerned. This tactic actually worked quite well, and after a considerable Rus loss, Yaroslav retreated with his broken lines and ordered everyone to meet back up, not in nearby Kiev, but in Yaroslav's stronghold way up north in Novgorod. So why not meet up in Kiev? See, Yaroslav was weakened, no doubt, by the loss, but he most likely thought that if he retreated to Kiev, a place largely sympathetic to Svatopluk still, that a siege would soon be laid and he would be trapped. Retreat to safety and regroup seemed to be the wisdom he followed, which, as we know, would work out for him in the long run. Now, what were the Pechenegs doing during the Battle of Bug River? Boleslaw had sent them toward Kiev even before Yaroslav had lost the battle. It seems Yaroslav the Wise would be an accurate name for him. But let's give some credit to Boleslaw for his forethought. There's a reason why he forced the Holy Roman Emperor to back down eventually. The guy's smart. The Battle of the Bug River in 1018 would stand as a crowning moment for both the Polish and the Rus, believe it or not, but not for the same reasons, obviously. It would mark yet another incredible achievement for Boleslaw the Brave's growing legend, and it would also mark a turning point in Yaroslav the Wise's legend as well. Where one knocked another mark on his belt, the other would use it as the last missed opportunity on his bid for greatness. Two legendary rulers met on the battlefield, and each gained something invaluable by the outcome. An interesting historical juxtaposition, to be sure. But when it's all said and done, Bolesław's son-in-law had but one more year in power. In fact, maybe one more year on this mortal coil, you could say. See, Yaroslav would lick his wounds, gather an even larger Novgorodian army, and march south toward his destiny as Grand Prince of the Kiev and godfather of the Kievan Golden Age until his death in 1054. But Boleslaw didn't just pull back after Bug River. No way. In pure Boleslaw fashion, he annexed some Kievan territory on his way out, taking it as payment for the aid he lent to his son-in-law, even against his son-in-law's wishes. Besides, as far as Boleslaw was concerned, these lands known as Red Ruthenia at the time were his by right. Mieszko took and controlled them back in the 970s, but lost them in the early 980s. Boleslaw was just claiming what had once been stolen, in his thinking, right, from the Polish people. That's as far as he was concerned. Today, that same Red Ruthenia would be a part of Western Ukraine. Boleslaw was speaking from a powerful place in European politics in 1018 to 1019. If not a Grand Prince of Kiev, ruler of these fierce Proto-Russians, or the Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of about 1/3 of all of Europe's population and most influential governing body on the continent, then who? Who could stop Boleslaw? Who could stand up to Boleslaw and keep him from taking another slice of foreign territory? Boleslaw the Brave? Sure, no question. But I tend to think that Boleslaw the Bold might be more accurate. There is, especially from a Polish perspective, much to be celebrated in Poland's first two official rulers, Mieszko I and Boleslaw I. Its territory was vastly increased, its standing army in Europe from every possible measurement, politics, economics, societal, religious. These were elevated to be on par with the most powerful and influential around. 3 Holy Roman emperors were forced to come to the Polish table and seek fealty. Western Slavs in the region were forced to come to grips with the Poles. Period. They had no outlet. They had no leverage. They had no chance, really, by the end of it. From the Baltic to the Alps and the Bug to damn near the Elbe in Germany, Poland had risen to greatness during the years of heightened Slavic enslavement and subjugation. They emerged victorious over their oppressors and their enslavers. They even emerged as a growing center of Christianity of all things, though it would take decades for all of those little wood and stone churches to fully take root out in the fields and backwoods of central Poland. They had the ears of popes, emperors, kings, dukes, and grand princes. In short, Poland went from campfires and huts to hearths and stone castles in the course of 2 generations, which is a staggeringly short period of time for such growth, especially in the Middle Ages. Such rapid growth and advancement can leave any person or group reeling, and to quote Adam Zamoyski in his seminal work entitled The Polish Way, he writes, quote, "The empire-building policies of Mieszko and Boleslaw had outstripped the means of the nascent state, which could not digest all their conquests at such a rate." End quote. Essentially, Poland became too big too quickly, as it would turn out. But before we get to that, Boleslaw had one more trick up his sleeve. Now, some pro-Polish sources claim that Boleslaw was crowned King of Poland as far back as the turn of the millennium, but these records are suspect at best. I mean, even the Anglo-Saxon was kind of retconned there in some of those chronicles. More firm accounts from Germany exist that show Bolesław's coronation couldn't have happened that far back, as that was when the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, though marveling at the Polish state on his visit in the year 1000, was seeking loyalty from the Polish, not to acknowledge its equality among the tops of European royalty. If Otto could get away with making Poland a vassal state, why would he legitimize its ruler as king, right? He received fealty from a young Boleslaw and kept him on as a duke. The Duchy of Poland was powerful enough. Why give it more of a reason to seek power and influence, and even territory, by elevating it to a kingdom? It just makes no sense, right? However, we know without a shadow of a doubt when Boleslaw was officially crowned the first king of Poland. The year was 1024. He had fallen back to Gniezno after securing a victory against Yaroslav at the Bug River a few years earlier, and securing his newly acquired territory between the Bug and the San rivers. That's what he had stolen on his way back west when he was leaving Kievan Rus territory, when Yaroslav pretty much had it in the bag. So what was left? The emperor had turned away from Poland. He had the Czechs thinking twice about messing with the Poles in the lowland plains, and Bohemians were cowed for a time. And even Yaroslav was soon to build a peaceful and prosperous and learning and trade-centered mini-empire based in Kiev. Oh, and by 1024, his nephew was the unquestionable ruler of both Denmark and England. So Boleslaw was in a pretty fantastic place between 1019 and 1024. But in 1024, he heard word of another big event that would force change upon the continent. Irreversible change upon the continent. Holy Roman Emperor Henry II died, causing yet another epic succession crisis to his west. And as former Chicago mayor and top Obama official Rahm Emanuel said in recent years, Boleslaw knew that he should, quote, "never let a good crisis go to waste," end quote. Zamoyski writes, quote, "The Polish realm was now large by any standards, and its sovereign status seemed beyond doubt." To stress this, in the last year of his life, 1025, Boleslaw had himself crowned King of Poland in Gniezno Cathedral. It was a great moment, end quote. And it was for Boleslaw. In the momentary absence of a Holy Roman Emperor, or even a king in Germany, Boleslaw took full advantage of the power vacuum to declare Poland entirely sovereign. Poland would, in his visions, stand on its own, fully, for the first time in history. Poland, in reality, had stood on its own for quite some time, having dealt with some serious players on the European scene for decades and coming out victorious against them, but the reality was it was always a vassal state to Germany. Until somewhere between Christmas Eve of 1024 to Easter Sunday of 1025, sources vary on exactly when, but they all tend to agree it was one of these dates. It was between these two few months that Boleslaw took the first crown of Poland. This was right under the nose of the new German king, Conrad II, who wouldn't take kindly to such an affront while he was desperately consolidating his power throughout the places like Germany, Burgundy, Rome, and eventually Italy. But that's a story for another time and another Polish ruler, as King Boleslaw I was now a battle-hardened politician who spent much of the last 30 years on horseback riding across Central Europe, from lowland marshes to frigid mountain passes. He was around 58 years old, and he died on June 17th, 1025, having only been king of Poland for up to 6 months, depending on which source of his coronation you go with. Contemporaries, as well as others like Gallus Anonymous, writing about a century later, had much to say of his passing. Wippo of Burgundy, a contemporary of Bolesław's, once wrote, quote, "Boleslaw, Duke of Poland, took for himself, in injury to King Conrad, the regal insignia and the royal name. Death swiftly killed his temerity." End quote. Yeah, not exactly a glowing obituary, but Wippo was writing, again, from the Kingdom of Burgundy, and the Kingdom of Burgundy had sworn its allegiance to the German king and essentially the Holy Roman Empire. And though Conrad had only, to that point, reached the height of King of Germany, everyone could see Conrad's future as long as he kept breathing. Wippo, by effect, stated that Bolesław's coronation was the reason for his death, as it was a direct affront to King Conrad. A clever piece of proactive propaganda, for sure. However, as Zamoyski writes, quoting Gallus Anonymous here, he says, quote, "With the passing from this world of King Boleslaw, the golden age turned into a leaden one. Poland, hitherto a queen crowned with shining gold and precious stones, now sits on ashes, dressed in widow's weeds, while the sound of the zither has turned to wailing, joy to sorrow, and the voice of the organ to a bitter sigh." End quote. It's an interesting passage. First, Gallus Anonymous calls him King Boleslaw, which means that even a century later, Boleslaw held such a title and such a place in the hearts of Poles and other West Slavs. Also, Gallus states the, quote, golden age has turned to a leaden one, end quote, giving us here on the podcast a little foreshadowing of what's to come for Poland. It would be similar if the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was to write of Canute's reign in comparison to the years after his death in much the same way. A period of legendary prosperity brought down by the death of one person and the subsequent lack of leadership abilities by those who came after him. I also appreciate the poetic juxtaposition in the passage about Poland being a queen crowned with shining gold and precious stones, no longer sitting on more stone or more jewels or more wealth, but rather now sitting on something earthy and primitive and dirt-like. That is the, as it says, ashes, and dressed in widow's weeds. It's quite clever wordplay there. But this isn't the end of the Kingdom of Poland. Not yet, anyway. There will be another king we discuss next time on the podcast. In much the same way the Eastern Roman Empire passed from Basil II to Constantine VIII, and England passed from Canute the Great to Harold Harefoot, so too Poland's great period of expansion and prosperity be punctuated by a period of absolute defeat and disarray. But Boleslaw I would live in the hearts and minds of Poles, even today, as a representation of the Polish will and the Polish spirit. In fact, back in 2013, Bolesław the Great was rededicated on an extremely valuable 99.9% gold coin. The front has a depiction of what history has come to recognize as Bolesław I, with the Latin inscription, Boleslaw dictis crobri siva strenuus. And on the back of the coin is written, Primus in Polonia regio diademete insignitis terminos imperii ad albim Borisentanem et ossum victor designivat obiit a domin 1025 aetat 58 reg 33. So if you're lost by that, Here's a loose translation for you. The coin says, "The first in Poland by crown decorated. State borders on the Elbe, Dnieper, and Ossi. Winner marked. He died in 1025 at the age of 58. The reign of 33 years on April 3rd. This information about the coin comes directly from the website numista.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode about the reign and legacy of Boleslaw the Brave. Poland's 11th century still has so much more to offer, so I hope you stick around for a new episode each month. I currently have the Poland series slated for another 4 or 5 episodes, but that's subject to change as I continue to unearth more information. If you find these stories and this information valuable and entertaining, please spread the word. The larger we can grow this show, the more time I can afford to put into it. In the meantime, please continue to enjoy it. You're here listening for the exact same reasons I'm here creating it. To learn, to appreciate, and to be entertained. Thanks again. Until next time.